When religion became the world's richest business, someone was bound to question the profits. What began as a cry for faith turned into a battle over fortune. And what followed wasn't just a spiritual revolt. It was the world's first financial revolution. They say revolutions begin with belief, but the Reformation began with debt. For centuries, the Catholic Church wasn't just a guardian of souls. It was the beating heart of Europe's financial system. It owned vast lands, lent to kings, collected tithes from peasants, and taxed nearly every stage of human existence. Faith at its height was a business model, a spiritual empire disguised as devotion. By the early 1500s, Rome had mastered the art of monetizing eternity. From indulgences to sacred relics, the promise of salvation was priced, packaged, and sold. Every prayer had an invoice, every sin a fee. Yet beneath the grandeur of cathedrals and the glitter of gold chalices, the institution that claimed divine authority was drowning in earthly debt. Wars, palaces, and projects like St. Peter's Basilica had drained its coffers. Enter Pope Leo X, a man born into the Medici banking dynasty, who viewed faith with the precision of a financier. To refill Rome's treasury, he turned salvation into a fundraising campaign. Indulgent sellers roamed the streets, preaching that coins could free souls from purgatory. But the money didn't stay with the people. It flowed south, enriching a city already steeped in marble excess. The Church had become what every empire eventually becomes, a system sustained not by belief, but by revenue. To understand the Reformation, you have to see the Church for what it truly was, the world's first multinational corporation. Its influence stretched from Lisbon to Krakow, its revenues rivaling kingdoms. Every priest was a collector, every bishop a broker. The Vatican wasn't simply saving souls, it was managing Europe's balance sheet. The Church controlled trade, taxation, and even territory. Its laws reached beyond borders, and its vaults held the wealth of nations. When Spain and Portugal began their voyages of exploration, it was the Pope who decided how the profits would be divided. In 1494, with a single decree, the Treaty of Tordesillas, the Pope drew a line across the world map, granting half the globe to Portugal and the other half to Spain. It was the earliest version of global monopoly, faith as the foundation of empire. Meanwhile, the money collected from indulgences and tithes didn't build hospitals or schools for the poor. It financed the Vatican's art, armies, and politics. Merchant bankers like the Fuggers of Germany acted as intermediaries, moving silver across borders like modern wire transfers. The system was efficient, but deeply exploitative. In towns across Europe, resentment grew. The poor paid to survive, the rich paid to be forgiven. Faith was now a currency, and salvation a commodity. And when the spiritual economy starts to look like Wall Street, collapse is inevitable. By 1517, that collapse began, not with armies, but with one man and a hammer. In Wittenberg, Martin Luther, a quiet scholar, saw through the illusion. The Church claimed to sell redemption, but what it was really selling was control. When indulgence preachers arrived in his town, turning forgiveness into a traveling franchise, Luther recognized the deeper rot. Faith had become credit, and Rome was the lender. When he nailed his 95 Theses to the church door, it wasn't just rebellion, it was a balance sheet audit of the spiritual economy. He exposed a truth Europe had long ignored, that salvation couldn't be monetized without corruption. His message spread like wildfire, not by word of mouth, but by technology. The printing press, barely a century old, transformed his critique into a viral movement. Within months, pamphlets flooded Europe, each one a spark in the tinderbox of discontent. For the first time in history, the Church's monopoly on information was broken. Luther's words reached beyond pulpits and palaces, into the hands of ordinary workers and merchants. And what they read wasn't just theology, it was liberation, from Rome's taxes, from papal banks, from the guilt economy that had ruled their lives. The Reformation had begun, not as an act of faith, but as an act of economic defiance. While Luther challenged Rome with words, another man would challenge it with law. Across the Channel, King Henry VIII of England was facing his own crisis. one that began with marriage but ended in economics. When the Pope denied his request for annulment, Henry saw more than personal rejection. He saw the limits of his own sovereignty. England had been sending money to Rome for generations, through tithes, indulgences, and papal taxes. Every coin that left his kingdom strengthened the same foreign power that claimed authority over him. In 1534, Henry passed the Act of Supremacy, declaring himself head of the Church of England. It was less a spiritual revolution than a fiscal one, a declaration that England would no longer pay for salvation imported from Rome. Then came the dissolution of the monasteries. Over just a few years, Henry seized every abbey, priory, and convent in the realm. The Catholic Church had owned nearly a third of England's land. Suddenly, it all belonged to the crown. Gold chalices were melted, relics sold, sacred estates auctioned to merchants and nobles. What had once been holy became liquidity. The result was one of the largest wealth transfers in European history. Faith turned into capital, belief into property. Henry hadn't just broken with Rome. He had nationalized heaven's balance sheet. What began as rebellion against Rome quietly redefined the world's financial order. The Reformation didn't end the marriage of faith and money. It rewrote the vows. Northern Europe, now Protestant, adopted a new moral code. Labor became sacred, thrift became virtue, and prosperity became proof of divine favor. The Church had once sold indulgences as forgiveness. Now, the market sold opportunity as freedom. The same faith once placed in priests shifted toward institutions, banks, governments, and currencies. The idea of trust, once spiritual, became financial. People no longer prayed for salvation, they worked for security. They didn't buy indulgences to escape purgatory, they bought credit to escape poverty. The system changed, but the psychology stayed the same. Today, governments print money with the same promise the Church once offered: redemption, stability, hope. Corporations preach progress the way popes once promised paradise. Markets demand faith, faith that tomorrow's value will be greater than today's. We've traded cathedrals for skyscrapers, confessionals for credit scores. The Reformation wasn't just a crisis of belief, it was a shift in what humanity believed in. Whoever controls belief controls behavior, whether through religion or through finance. And as history shows, every empire built on faith, spiritual or economic, endures only as long as trust does. If this changed the way you see history, share it with someone who still thinks faith and money don't mix. The line between belief, power, and profit has always been thinner than we're taught to see, because understanding how faith became finance might just reveal how the world still truly works today.